All right, friends, welcome back to Course 7 and our massive open online course for mission transition. This course is focused on civilian resume basics. We just completed Course 6 on federal resume basics. If you skip Course 6, we're going to refer back to it in a couple spots, especially in terms of the types and number of resources we need to refer to identify the information we need for our civilian resume. So let's get into it. We have two objectives today. First is to understand the basis for building your resume for civilian opportunities, and obviously, if you're watching this course, how to actually build that resume. A couple skills we want to highlight: ability to build that resume for opportunities in civilian industry, and something that results in something that's going to get you a result. The whole point of a resume, friends, is simply to enable a follow-on interview. Okay. As always, we've got various materials here. Of course, my book. Please note specifically Chapter 4. Always, as you go through these things, make sure to take notes, perhaps in concert with the book, and make sure you have access to the web as well. Number of resources here. Again, check out my website. Chock full of resources here, specifically around resumes. You'll see me refer to any number of downloadable versions of different types of resumes, notes, cover letters, etc. Tons of stuff there. Please check it out. You'll find me on social media on various numbers of platforms. And as always, I highly recommend you watch this course and conduct these exercises with someone, preferably someone that has already been through the process and can help guide you. Here's where we are in the process, preparing your resume. We'll go from here into talking about documenting your network and how to leverage that network and begin to apply for roles using your resume and your network. There are any number of resume types. You can see them reflected on this chart. Our last course focused on the outline version of a resume, which is unique for governmental opportunities. This one, we're going to be talking about the first three lines in this chart. There's three different types of resumes. You can see them noted here. Not all of these are in scope. I don't focus, for example, on entry-level roles. Again, the book is focused on NCOs and above, short of general or admiral ranks. In that case, that's why I'm focusing on mid-level and senior level roles. The chronological resume specifically focused on mid and senior, functional and combination focused on more senior level roles. More to come on that. Before we get into the details on the resume, I think it's helpful to have some context for what actually needs to go in these things. I'm going to talk you through what I call a 5-minute MBA. You don't need a full 2-year MBA to have this perspective, but it's important to have this perspective before we start putting pen to paper and translating our experience and skills and into something that we expect to put in the hands of a civilian hiring manager. So let's get into the detail here. A commercial, in other words, for-profit business, for it to exist as a business, needs to have two things. Obviously, a product or a service that's of value, something that people are willing to pay for, and people that are actually willing to pay for that product or service. The way that these things are reflected on a standard income statement of any for-profit enterprise is reflected in the lines on this chart. And let me just walk you through. I'll get to the value of this here momentarily, but it's important you understand this is probably the primary metric that these organizations hold themselves to, and the goals corresponding to each of these line items. So standard income statement, top to bottom, goes as follows. The top line is always revenue. And revenue is the simple product of price multiplied by the volume of whatever the product or service is. The goal of any for-profit enterprise is to increase that revenue from a period-to-period basis, whether you measure that on a quarterly level, annual level. And those organizations will always have goals with regard to most of these line items. And you see some examples reflected here. In this case, they want to increase it 10% per year. You subtract direct costs from revenue to result in a contribution margin. Direct costs would be things like labor, the cost of those in your organization producing that product or service, the material, if you're working with a product, what are the raw materials that are used to produce that product? And your goal as a business is to decrease the cost of those direct costs and thus increase the contribution margin that one realizes. From contribution margin, we subtract indirect costs. And these are things travel, overhead, management, what have you. And as above, we want to decrease the amount of indirect costs that, as a result, increases what's called our operating margin. And then from operating margin, which again also almost always has a goal. In this case, you see the example of increasing that 12% per year. From operating margin, we subtract taxes, which result in a net income, otherwise known as profit. And as above, we want to decrease the amount of taxes that we pay and thus increase the net income or profit that the organization realizes. In this case, I have a goal of increasing it 10% per year. So why does this matter? Well, most organizations are judged by their ability to produce a positive and increasing net income quarter over quarter, year over year. To succeed, these organizations have to either increase revenue or decrease costs in any legal way that they can do that. And so here's the kicker. To the extent that you can help an organization do any of these things to impact any of these line items in this chart, you are seen as a valuable asset to that organization. And so the content of your resume and the translation of your skills and experiences have to speak directly to how you can help the organization impact any of these line items. All right, we're going to get into much more detail in this. We've got a follow-on course about skills translation, but I want you to have this perspective before we get into the resumes themselves. Here's the good news, and you'll hear me echo this later on in the MOOC. You bring with you not only potentially hard skills that directly translate to the line items on that income statement, you bring soft skills. The Institute for Veterans and Military Families did a long study that documented what are the 10 characteristics that all veterans bring with them from their time in the service. And all of these are transferable skills. These are things that you can reflect on and bring forth in translating the experiences you have, the skills that you've gained through your time in service to make the point about the value that you add and how you can impact each of the line items on the part from the previous slide. So just to run through these, all right, you are entrepreneurial. Every time you've gone downrange and crossed the line of departure, you did so with a mission that had some intent, but typically those plans go out the window the moment you cross the line of departure, where you're forced to react, adjust, adapt, and overcome to whatever it is you face crossing that line of departure. And those are things that enable you to exhibit entrepreneurial skill set. You have high levels of trust up and down the chain of command in your organization. You've had to trust those leaders and those members of your unit to follow through on the orders that they're given to accomplish the mission. You're adept at skills transfer across multiple tasks and contexts. You have and leverage advanced technical training. Think of all the time you've spent, months, perhaps even years, in standardized training, standardized courses you've taken, regardless of the service that you're in, and a good portion of which hard skills, again, directly translate, but if not the hard skills, for example, I was a tanker in the Army. Thankfully, we don't have too many tanks rolling down the street. But at a minimum, you've got the soft skills that we're talking about here that do directly translate. You're comfortable and adept in discontinuous environments. You've gone downrange, you've worked in likely different countries, different cultures. Again, you know how to adapt and overcome in the spite of chaos and other environments that you have encountered. You exhibit high levels of resiliency. You don't quit. You exhibit advanced team building skills. Regardless of what role you've had and what unit that you've been in, you have undoubtedly worked as a team and worked through the issues from the outset to become a fully functioning team. You have strong organizational commitment. Loyalty is one of those hallmarks, those values that we have coming from the military. You have and leverage cross-cultural experiences. Again, whether that's in the organizations themselves for whom you've worked in the military, or the experiences you've had when you have deployed or gone on a mission. You've worked in those different countries, different cultures, and you have experience and skill in diverse workplace settings. Think of all the places you've been, whether it's stateside or OCONUS. All of that, friends, are strengths, are characteristics that you bring with you and are absolutely transferable to what you potentially are going to do in the civilian world. So let's get into, with all of that as context, let's get into the construction of resumes themselves. We're going to talk about a number of rules here, not to be overly detailed, but these are simple rules of the road and things you should follow. We're going to get into the different resume types and then talk about letters, cover letters, and thank you notes. So anyway, construction of the resume, no longer than 2 pages. Yes, even the more tenured among you, retiring colonels or naval captains, please, friends, no more than 2 pages. You know my background, and even my resume is only 2 pages. All right. In terms of font size, please use size 11. These things are almost surely going to be scanned, and so make sure that they're able to be scanned and maintain font size 11. Not without going into too much detail here, please don't use multiple degradations of font size from one level to the next indentation level. Try to avoid that, too much of that if you can. Excuse me. Unless you're applying for a role in the arts, please be consistent in the font type you use throughout the resume. And here are a number of font types that folks recommend. Please choose one and just be consistent with that. Again, unless you're applying for a role in the arts, please use the black font type throughout. The one exception are hyperlinks. If you're putting together an electronic resume and you have a hyperlink to, say, a paper that you published, it will automatically change font and be underlined depending on the type of software that you're using. And finally, hard copy versions. Yes, some organizations still require hard copy versions. Please use professional resume paper. Don't just print it off on your paper or your copy machine. Go to a local stationery office product supply store. There's many out there. I don't need to name them. And they will undoubtedly have any number of options here. Simply ask the clerk behind the counter. They can tell you what they have. Just make sure the paper uses neutral colors. You see some examples here, and is between 25 and 100% cotton or linen. Some additional rules of the road. Well, actually, let's convert here. Let's talk about the various resume types, okay? The first of those is chronological format. Again, to be used basically all levels of civilian opportunities. And here's how it's constructed. The work portion of it lists employers and dates first, responsibilities and accomplishments second. I'll show you an example here momentarily. For the content, you're going to start with your contact information at the top of the first page. That'll be followed by a short statement that summarizes your objective, right? And this will align with the nature of the employer's opportunity. The point I want to foot stomp here, friends, is you need to tailor each and every resume you're going to provide to an individual or an organization to their specific needs around what the particular opportunities are. We're not going to, as I like to say, carpet bomb companies, organizations with the identical resume. That is not a formula for success. Next, you're going to list your work experience in reverse chronological order, which means you list your most recent job first and then go backwards in time from there. Right? That's followed by your education, which will also be in reverse chronological order. Coming out of the military, unless you've used graduate school or college as a transition vehicle, you're viewed as an experienced hire. And as such, your experience is going to be most applicable and relevant to the opportunities to which you're applied. And so you should list experience prior to your education. I often get that question. And again, as I mentioned, your education is listed in reverse chronological order as well, which would place your most recent and highest degree at the top of the list of education. And then a question I always get as well is around security clearance. Coming out of the military, your security clearance should be active. And if it is, and assuming that it potentially applies to the role that you're considering, you should absolutely include it. If it's applicable to the role to which you're applying, you should list it near the top of the first page, even perhaps in your summary. And for roles, even where it isn't required, I'd suggest still including it, but towards the bottom of the resume. So here's an example of a chronological resume. In this case, for a mid-level opportunity, you see it's a single page, constructed as I've just kind of walked through contact information at the top. All right, experience, a summary of what that is, and then goes into reverse chronological order on your experience, and then towards the bottom, your education, and followed by any additional information that could potentially be applicable. You will find this, as well as all of the examples that follow, on my website, downloadable, a template for your use in tailoring for whatever purpose, whether that's networking or submission to an organization for potential opportunities. Please take advantage. Chronological resumes are also applicable at senior levels. And as a senior level person with greater tenure, you're going to have greater experience, perhaps greater education as well. The same principles we walk through still hold. You can see on this version the contact information at the top of the page, followed by a summary in reverse chronological order, your experience, and the bottom of the second page there, you can see education, again in reverse chronological order. Again, please access my website for this template to download. The second resume type we're going to talk about is a functional format. These apply only to senior level civilian opportunities. Okay, this is a contrast from the chronological we just got finished reviewing, which is applicable to mid-level opportunities as well. All right, let's get into functional format. The work experience portion of the resume lists skills and accomplishments first, and employers and dates second. Here's the content. It's going to start again with your contact information at the top of the page. A short objective statement, again, which is going to align. So thus, friends, we need to tailor it. And your primary professional strengths related to that employer's opportunity, supported by detailed descriptions of the things that you've done that highlight those strengths. That'll be followed by your work or employment history, again in reverse chronological order, your education and training, again in reverse chronological order, and your security clearance, following the same rules we talked about above. Here's an example, again, only applicable to senior level, so you'll see 2 pages here. And again, downloadable on my website. You can see within the document itself, contact information at the front, followed by a statement about your profile, your professional expertise, highlighting those particular strengths, right? You see the main bullets there, followed by examples throughout our career, our tenure, where those strengths have been highlighted. Then you can see at the middle of the second page there, the work history in reverse chronological order, followed by education in reverse chronological order. Slightly different there. Last resume type I want to touch on here is the combination format. Again, strictly for those of us are more tenured, applying for more senior level opportunities. The combination format provides for more equal balance between employee and date data and duties and responsibilities data. Here's the content, again, starting with contact information at the top of the page, short objective statement, again, which is tailored and aligned to the opportunity to which we're applying. Your primary professional strengths related to the employer's opportunity, supported by detailed descriptions of where and how we've shown those things. Our work and employment history in reverse chronological format, all right? And lastly, education and training in reverse chronological format. And again, your security clearance where it's applicable. Here's the example. As always, a template downloadable on my website. Please check it out. You can see on this example, as we just reviewed, contact information at the top, a career summary, key competencies noted, all right, with detail of examples throughout our career where we've demonstrated that. Professional experience beginning at the bottom of the first page there. Again, reverse chronological format or sequence, if you will, of roles that we've had, which are applicable to the role and the organization to which we're applying, followed by the education, again in reverse chronological format. So one alternative here that I want to point out, only for senior level roles, and this is going to seemingly conflict with some advice I'll give here momentarily, but this is an alternative approach. Again, depending on the level of opportunity that senior level folks are seeking, I would purely limit this to executive level opportunities. And the difference here with this combination type resume is we've got an executive bio on the first page. You can see an example listed that does include a photo. And this is the only example of a resume that I would say where we would include a photo. I'll talk about a rule of thumb later on here where you should never do this. And again, I'm seemingly conflicting myself here. The second page in this combination is an executive highlight, again, in reverse chronological order, followed by education, reverse chronological order, and any other things that would apply. All right, so let's get into resume content. Again, some rules of the road, some detail here, not to get overly detailed, but these are some things to consider that are going to perhaps save you some space on the page and make sure you're in compliance with grammatical rules and what have you. Spell out numbers less than 2 digits. You can see the examples here. And so a single digit number you would spell out, whereas a double digit or more number, you would use the number itself rather than it spelling it out, unless those numbers or words are the first words of a sentence. Don't use personal pronouns. Please avoid those. Only use a period at the end of a bullet if there are 2 or more sentences. And the simple reason here is, frankly, just to save you some space on the page. It's funny when you start to throw all the experience you've had on a page, ways to cut corners. That's one. Feel free to use M or B to represent millions or billions. You can see the examples noted. Please do not include in your resume statements like references available upon request. First, it just saves you space on the page. Second, it's always assumed by organizations that if they want references, they're going to ask for and receive those references. Don't include your salary history or expectations. We're going to get into where and how that enters as part of the process. This is certainly not the time to bring that up. And then please don't include any information that could potentially lead to bias on behalf of the organization. Things such as political affiliation, religious beliefs, medical data, race, or even your picture. There's that rule that I was talking about that can be violated for sufficiently executive level opportunities, as I mentioned before. Let me end here, friends, with sample resumes and cover letters. Specifically, a cover letter here, again, templates available on my website for download. In the last course, we talked about the construction of these things at a high level, 3 paragraphs, the middle paragraph of which you see in the table there, where you specifically delineate the needs of the organization, how your credentials meet or exceed those needs. Please download this and tailor it as you will. Thank you notes. Can't foot stomp this one enough, team. Please use thank you notes for networking or application opportunities. Anytime you've had the opportunity to come across someone and they've been generous enough to give to you a portion of their time, please send them a formal thank you note. Here's a sample, download it, tailor it, but please utilize and send these to individuals. Let me end with our homework. All right, we started with the income statement. Please analyze that income statement and identify those areas where your strengths may impact those things. We're going to circle back on that and follow on courses, but let's start thinking about it. Identify the resume type that is going to be most applicable to you of the ones we've gone through. Begin collecting the information needed to populate your resume. I started by saying course 6, the Federal Resume Basics, goes into voluminous detail. Please refer back to the detail in that course and pull that information forth. Please check out my book. Lots of detail here. You're going to see additional perspective from folks that have gone through this process and some guidance, tips of the trade, if you will, that they'll put forth. We'll talk through approaches for using recruiting firms. We're going to talk about veteran collaboratives, which can be incredibly valuable to you in making this transition. Tips on the detailed construction of everything we just walked through. Talk about the samples in greater detail than we already have. You're going to get additional guidance from those of greater tenure well, and different nuances they've used. Additional information you're going to want to include in your resume. The alternative resume method that I spoke to earlier above for those of us that are more tenured, and additional resources to support resume construction. I'll share some of those with you momentarily. Words to the wise, as we always end with, please do translate your military skills. Again, there's a follow-on course on this, and that translation should speak directly to the lines on that income statement. To get this right, friends, you're going to need help from an outside party, whether that's a spouse, a partner, a fellow veteran, or a civilian that is familiar with the organization to which you're applying. You're going to need to run this past them to make sure that they understand what it is you're putting on the page. We're going to talk about networking in the next course that'll help identify who some of those individuals are. Tailor your resume to the needs of the organization and to the needs of the opportunity to which you're applying. Don't carpet bomb the same 1 or 2 page piece of paper to organizations. That is not going to result in success. And for those, again, of us that are sufficiently tenured, please consider an executive bio in addition to or in place of the resume. Things not to do. And I know these are tough because this is probably the first time you're going through this thing, this process and putting together a resume. You didn't have to do that in the military, but I know it gets frustrating, but please try to avoid getting frustrating with yourself. This is something that we all go through, and it has to be done. Okay, don't be satisfied with the first version of your resume. It's not going to be right, but again, don't be frustrated. Use others in your network that are going to help you get it right, and be open to the feedback they're going to provide. At the same time, as you ask for opinions, you're going to get a lot of them, and some of them will potentially conflict. So don't get confused. You're going to have to consider all the good guidance that they're intending to provide you and figure out which of it is going to apply for you and which is going to work best for you in your particular situation. Okay, with that, as I mentioned, as always, here are some additional resources. Please take advantage of them. All of them go into much more detail certainly than what's in this course, and likely more detail than what I have in my book itself. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out and contact me if you have questions on any of this. And as always, I'd like to end with a bonus video. In this case, I want to talk about the importance of beginning with the end in mind. All right, so here we go.
Well, that leads to a whole set of advice, and I wrap up every single chapter with keys to success. You'll find little bulletized lessons learned, if you will, to try to drive home the point in each of those chapters. One of the key things, and you hear most people repeat it, is to start early. But to quantify that, I would say at a minimum 12 months, I would push you to go 2 years out. In fact, as I intimate in the book, you should frankly start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would tell us. In getting in the military, you should have a view, a lens toward the education that you will take up to how that will eventually translate in the civilian world. As you pick up skills, how does that translate into a license, a certificate, a certification of some sort that means something to someone on the outside? Now, the military is improving this approach, but by and large, the historical approach has been wholly different than what the outside world would recognize. Likewise, to the formal education that you're going to go through, ensure that the courses that you take are recognized by outside educational institutions. You know, I literally had the opportunity this weekend to meet with a veteran. His name's Will Harrison, and he lamented the fact that when he got out, although as a non-commissioned officer he had sat through literally years of classwork that translated directly into a civilian degree, civilian organizations wouldn't recognize that in any way, shape, or form, and literally made him go back and get the exact same education that he had in the military. The way he said was, there was 10 years of my life between the repeated education and repeated experiences, 10 years wasted, that if he could have had that translation from the get-go, he could have been adding productivity from the minute that he got out of the service. And that's part of what we need to fix. And that's part of the key differentiators that, in part, there's an awful lot there that the book brings to bear.
All right, friends, thanks much. You know, even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is going to leave the service at some point and have to go through this process. So don't feel bad. It's something we all go through. Please leverage your network out there, and we'll talk soon. Thanks much.